Hi, everyone, and welcome to Legal Management Talk, where we're covering every angle of legal management. So, I know that cybersecurity is a topic that we talk about a lot in many different aspects, and you may be wondering, how much more is there really to discuss? But here with us today is Eric Hoffmaster, and he's the Chief Operating Officer of Innovative Computing Systems. And he has an article coming out in the upcoming October issue of Legal Management where he talks about layering and what that means in terms of what you should do as far as your cybersecurity posture and kind of what that looks like in practice. So, first of all, thanks for being here, Eric. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to see you.
So, when I think of a concept like cybersecurity, I think it helps to kind of visualize it a bit, especially when you say the word layering. And so I don't know, you can tell me if this is a bridge too far of a metaphor, but I'm going to go with like a lasagna because that's a pretty clearly layered food. And
Yeah.
so, um, kind of, could you just kind of take us through what layering means as far as, what does that lasagna look like? And then we'll kind of get into the individual levels.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about layering, it's more than just these layers strictly on top of each other. Because if you think any one piece of cybersecurity software is not likely to cover the entire breadth and depth of your entire ecosystem. Like one thing is not going to cover everything, right? So you might have to have one over here and then one here and then one over here. So there's a
Mhm.
little bit of layering on top of each other, but there's also layering side by side to make sure you're covering like I said, the entire breadth and width of the ecosystem. Right. So one might be, let's make sure the end users are covered. And we're going to start with something like endpoint protection at the workstation level and the mobile phones and the iPads, whatever it is,
Right.
PCs, Macs, whatever the endpoint protection layer is, we're going to cover the users, but that endpoint protection doesn't cover your network, right?
Mhm.
So, well, then you got to have another layer, and then maybe you have email, which doesn't directly interact with the endpoint protection, but email is pretty important, right? So
Sure.
you might have different layers kind of side by side as well as some stacked on top of each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know you mentioned endpoint protection, and so I would assume that's kind of, you know, the first layer that you're going to start with at the individual device level. So, what does that look like? What kinds of endpoint protections do you want to make sure that including at your firm?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Because if we start from nothing, like let's just imagine a world where we have a law firm and there's no cybersecurity software in place at all. I mean, it's scary, but let's
Hmm.
start with that as a foundation. If you have to choose one thing to do, you have to understand that users are the weakest link in any network, in any ecosystem, any environment. Users, the things that users do are the most risky behaviors. So you want to do things that are going to have the most impact to the end users, and having a antivirus, endpoint protection, something that is protecting the device they're working on from malicious acts, right? So endpoint protection is kind of the biggest key, and that's going to be typically your first investment in some kind of cybersecurity. And we look at the entire world of all of these different pieces of software that do endpoint protection. You've got your traditional antivirus software, the McAfee's, the web roots of the world that have been around for a very long time, and they do a very specific type of fighting viruses. But really, in today's world, and what we're going to need for the future is an endpoint protection software that actually goes beyond fighting a known enemy, but it's also fighting the unknown enemy, right? It's going to look at behaviors on the computer and identify when a behavior on the computer is suspect or malicious. You don't need to know the code that causes the problem. You just need to know, hey, this is a problem and it's happening. I better do something about it.
Right.
Right. So we call those next gen, or you might hear terms like EDR, endpoint detection and response, but just kind of next-gen behavioral-based antivirus. And a lot of these vendors that are putting out these endpoint detection products are starting to layer in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to more quickly identify these bad behaviors and put a stop to it. So when you're looking for an endpoint protection software, it's one that is one of these next-gen behavioral-based ones, and that's what I'd recommend.
Gotcha. And what can you talk a little bit more about what those behaviors are that you want to make sure that I know that the end user is the biggest risk and certainly gets, the threats get increased by the day. So what kind of behaviors are you guarding against, both from the actual person using the device and the person trying to, get into it from the other side?
Yeah, that's wonderful. So one of the probably the most common behaviors and something that most of us would probably realize or recognize is this idea of ransomware. Of if you get a ransomware on your computer, it's going to lock your files and require that you have to pay for them to unlock your files. So the behavior right there is locking these files. And they do it through encryption. They'll encrypt the file with a password that you can't get, right? So just the act of encrypting a file, that's not something that most users would do. That's a behavior that is pretty specific to malicious actors, malicious attempts, right?
Right.
So the act of encrypting files, you go, whoa, whoa, files are being encrypted, stop it. You don't have to wait till, oh, I can see that this is cryptojacking and it looks like this and it acts like this, and trying to respond after the fact. You need to respond before the fact or while it's happening. There's a lot of behaviors out there that we don't know what they look like yet. There's a lot of what's called zero-day attacks, which is something where the attacker knows that there's a vulnerability before the defender knows that it's even a vulnerability, and they're starting to attack. They're starting to take behaviors on that computer. It might be to try to get into a system or access the subsystem or a lower level of the system. Users aren't going to do that, but these malicious softwares will. And so when you can just step back and look at what's good on your computer and what's bad, these behaviors, stopping the behaviors before they actually happen is going to be where everybody needs to drive to.
Right. And so then let's kind of go to the next layer, which so now if we've kind of sussed out the behaviors that we need to keep an eye on at the endpoint level, then what's the next thing that you want to make sure that you're, putting in place?
Yeah, that's great. If we go back to the law firm with nothing, and
Right.
let's assume for a second that we've implemented that endpoint protection, the advanced next gen, everything's great there. So if a user clicks on a link or enters their password and something is trying to happen to your computer, it's not happening anymore. What's next? And that answer is not uniform for all firms, right? There are a lot of firms that have a higher priority on things like email over network, right? If you're let's say you're a firm that works in a centralized office and everybody comes together and works together, kind of like we did before COVID, and many of us still do
Right.
today. But if you're in that environment, having a network and having the firewall and having real good protection on the perimeter or protection on your network might be more important than having another piece of protection that does something different, right? What I'm trying to get at is it's all about the priorities of the firm. There's only 3 or 4 pieces that really matter for most, network security being one, like multi-factor authentication being one, email security being one, you know. So really all 3 of these are kind of your number 2. You're not going to do them all at the same time, and we can cover that. But if your firm prioritizes more email security is really high because we get so many phishing attempts and so many malicious links and files. Maybe email's the thing, or maybe, no, I need multi-factor authentication because I don't want any passwords to be compromised, right? They're kind of equally as important. So it's really hard to say, what do you do number 2, right? It's easy to say what
Yeah.
number 1 is,
Hmm.
but number 2 email security or multi-factor authentication or network security tends to be a little bit less important as we're moving to a more remote world. So email security and multi-factor authentication tend to be what we see as that next step, that number two.
Yeah. And anytime you say multi-factor authentication, I just think of how that's so it's so you can't get around it now. You need it to
Yeah.
log in to so many things, even though as frustrating as it is that you're like, this is I'm me, this is me. I don't You don't need to send me another code 5 minutes later. But
Yeah.
it is kind of crucial whenever you're accessing any kind of sensitive information that you need to have the mindset of, yeah, I got to go through this extra layer.
Yeah. And Justin, you're right. This whole idea of why do you need to verify me? I'm me. I mean, that's kind
Hmm.
of inherently what we deal with security. Security is a barrier to functionality, but it's a needed barrier to make sure you're supposed to have that functionality,
Right.
right? So it's always got to be a balance between this pain of implementing and using security with the features that it provides. It's
Hmm.
always a delicate dancing game or a balancing act there for sure.
Yeah. So I know obviously one size doesn't fit all, and each firm has to decide where its priorities lie. But, if we're talking about the remote world, it is a lot of it about cloud security now and making sure that things stay protected there. And I know a little while back we talked to your colleague Amy Kosi about the cloud and how that works in a legal setting. But have there been any kind of newer changes to cloud security and what you need to look at when kind of getting away from a centralized network?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So when we talk about being in the cloud, there's kind of this inherent understanding that move the stuff to the cloud. It's secure up there because the vendor secures their cloud, right? No, it's kind of a shared responsibility though, because
Mm-hmm.
once you have your little piece of the cloud, it's your job to secure that little piece of the cloud. The vendor will secure part of it, but you're also responsible for securing your part. And so there's a lot of stuff you can do, and it depends on the cloud, right? So if we look at Microsoft 365, that's what many people use today. You have a piece of your cloud up there, whether that's just the email or SharePoint, OneDrive files, you're doing Azure. So you got your little piece of Microsoft cloud, but then you're responsible for securing that too, putting in things like conditional access. Don't let me into this cloud unless you conform to this specific set of criteria. Conditional access or approved devices. You, you need to also lock down your part of the cloud. It's not just set it and forget it for the vendors too. So, I mean, with security, things are popping up all the time. Something recent that's been added in terms of security to the cloud is being able to take all the security events that happen in that cloud, all the login attempts, all the permission changes, and actually aggregate that into one artificial intelligence system that's constantly looking for, hey, this kind of login attempt is not normal. Let's stop it. It's behavior based, right? We're going back to the
Yeah.
endpoint protection, but for the cloud, right? Having someone actively, and I say someone because there are 24 by 7 teams of people that look at this kind of stuff with artificial intelligence backing it up. But looking at the logs, who's logging in? Where are they logging in from? What are they trying to access? If there are abnormal things, that's a threat. Let's go investigate that threat. Right. So
Right.
that is, we're seeing that a lot in cloud deployments, and it pretty much for any cloud.
Yeah. Have you noticed any examples recently of firms that have kind of faced an attack and been able to successfully combat it using the measures that they put in place?
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of biggest threats to law firms is this ransomware. Somebody clicked on a link, put in their password, somebody got access to a system, somebody ransomed files. And that tends to be one of the most prolific attacks because it's the most rewarding. There's a lot of money associated with that.
Hmm.
And so having a robust backup system that not only backs up your files, backs up your systems, but also has a backup of a backup. that is not associated or not connected to your main backup system. So somebody logs into your system, they ransom your files, maybe they corrupt your backups too, and you can't restore from backup. So you have to have another backup of a backup somewhere else. And we've actually worked with firms who have had a ransomware incident and their files were corrupted or encrypted. And they go, wait, I need to back up. But their backup was also compromised. So then, because they had, we'll call them air gapped backups, but they've got backups that are not connected via the network anywhere to their production data, we can go grab that backup. We can take that. We can restore them. That ransom is completely gone. It's clean. You don't have to pay the ransom. You don't have to worry about, even if you pay the ransom, do they still have their claws in your system at some point? Right.
Hmm.
And we've worked with firms who've successfully done that of, oh no, we had the bad event, but I've got extra safety precautions built in. And I guess that kind of ties back into the layers, right? So if you have a layer of a backup system, another layer is a backup of a backup, right? And so that would be kind of what
Right.
you would call a vertical layer versus the horizontal that we talked about first.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a very critical thing.
Yep. And speaking of money involved, cyber insurance is obviously a huge thing, and we talked about that in a recent episode as well, which the link will show up on your screen right about now. So obviously, the insurance providers have certain requirements that you have to meet in order to qualify for the insurance.
Yeah.
But as far as the kind of layers and stuff and systems that they want to see, what are some of the latest updates on that front?
Yeah, the cyber insurance realm is changing. It's in flux right now. The things that insurance providers are requiring are getting more. They're increasing by the day, it seems.
Hmm.
Whereas 3 or 4 years ago, to get cyber insurance, you had a basic list of questions, and it was not very complex. Do you have endpoint protection? Do you have multi-factor authentication? And some of what we call the layer one, layer two, the most important ones. But now we're seeing a lot with cyber insurance that are asking for SIEM, SIEM, and that's the log aggregation and threat hunting that I was talking about of, are you collecting your logs from all these different systems, and do you have a team of people that are constantly looking for threats? Right? We didn't see that even 2 years ago. We're seeing it now as a requirement for a lot of cyber insurance. And so things are adapting, things are changing. It's not just SIM, it's things like vulnerability management of, are you actively looking for potential vulnerabilities in your environment and actively working to stop those or to close those holes? Years ago we didn't see any of that, right? And so it's not just about the technologies with the cyber insurance carriers, because they're saying, yeah, do you have these things? But they're going to hold you to it. So what happens is if you do have a breach, they're going to go back and say, you answered it this way, but you were doing it this way. I'm not going to cover it. Right. So it's not just about saying you have these technologies. It's actually walking the walk, talking the talk. You've got to have what you say and you have to practice what you preach type of stuff. And that's becoming more and more prevalent about actually having to do it, not just
Yeah,
say you do.
right. Uh, do a lot of firms have those resources to be able to, commit the time and the manpower to really make sure that they're, keeping an eye on these threats for their own good and for insurance requirements?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so if you talk about larger law firms, they're obviously going to have more resources,
Yeah.
financial and manpower resources to be able to handle that kind of thing. That leaves the small and medium law firms kind of out in the wind because they typically don't have the resources to develop a system or create all these policies and the management oversight to say, are we doing all these things? That's kind of tough. And so what you have is companies like mine, Innovative Computing Systems, and also other companies out there that focus on how can I help bring these cybersecurity solutions and these more enterprise level solutions down to the small and medium law firms because they need it and they're not going to get insured if they don't have it. But then how do we use machine learning, use AI, use automation to ensure those policies are actually applied and working? and proving we're doing what we say we're doing without having to invest a lot of manpower into micromanaging my security layers, right? So
Yep.
that's a strategy we see a lot.
Great. And since you mentioned AI, we have to talk about it. Uh, what are, as AI keeps growing and changing, with each passing minute, it seems like, what are some of the cybersecurity implications of instituting AI systems at your firm?
I love talking about AI. I could be here for years doing this. Don't worry, I'm not going to.
Yep.
Um, with AI, a lot of the reluctance to adopt AI is coming from a place of fear. Now, in the legal industry, confidentiality is huge, and there's a lot of fear of, if I start using AI, is my confidential data going to just end up on the internet somewhere, right? And that concern is founded. So let's talk about that, right? If you use a tool like ChatGPT, that was kind of the first normal natural language AI things that came out of months ago, right? There's a free version. Anybody can go on and start chatting with ChatGPT,
Yep.
right? There's no guarantee. In fact, there's no promise at all that what you type into that won't end up on the internet, right? They use those prompts to help train the model, to train the brain behind it, right? So the free version, you start putting stuff in, it's going to get out there. If you use a paid version, if you upgrade to the Pro or the Teams or the Enterprise, there's inherent protections. They say that anything you put into ChatGPT will not be used to train any fundamental models. It means what you put in will not leave. It will not get out on the internet, right? Oh, okay. There's an inherent layer of safety and security there. So takeaway is, don't use the free version if you're going to start working on work stuff,
Right.
use the Pro, use them. There's also Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft Copilot, that's the Microsoft version. It actually uses OpenAI's kind of chat GPT model as its brain. But Microsoft says nothing you put in here will ever make it back to that fundamental brain. All of your prompts are secure. Not only are all your prompts secure, but because Microsoft has access to your email and your OneNote and your OneDrives and your Excel and your Word documents and SharePoint, it says, I will preserve your permissions. So if I'm an attorney at a law firm and I start typing in, hey, what documents are related to this? And you've got an ethical wall built around a certain client matter, that attorney can't see that client matter because they don't have permissions to, right? So it's not just about your data is not getting out to the internet, but it's going to preserve your permissions as well. And then you got tools like we'll call CoCounsel or LexisAnswers or Ask iManage. A lot of these other legal specific vendors are leveraging AI. And so, well, what happens if I put stuff into there? Every vendor's got their own little security things. So there's fear around the security and confidentiality. I think the biggest takeaways are with Microsoft Copilot, you don't have to worry about the fear. Most of us are trusting Microsoft to host our email right now. It's the same layers of security and confidentiality you have in operating email. ChatGPT, use the paid version. But just like the Bar Association, they put out their opinion article a few months ago about how everybody needs to understand the capabilities of AI, right? Understanding the security around AI too,
Yep.
right? What does LexisAnswers, what does CoCounsel do? Understanding the security around that. And I think another piece of fear around AI, I won't go too deep here. Another piece of fear around AI is there's been cases where an attorney might use AI on a case and referencing case law that actually never existed. They use ChatGPT spits something back out, they go to court, the case gets thrown out because it's not actually real. Right?
Yep.
So something like a CoCounsel or a Juris AI actually uses a source of truth. They go, we know that all this case law has been trained on our AI. It's legit. You're not going to get fake case law or fake cases here. So you have more of a trust factor in those specific targeted things versus like a chat GPT, which has the wealth of the internet. And we all know everything on the internet's true. So, I mean, you can take away some fear that when you use a known good source of truth. And that's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah. And then lastly, just to kind of bring us back full circle, I know an idea that you've floated before is that bad actors are going to be taking advantage of AI to kind of send that ransomware that looks even more legit
Yeah,
and really they're innovating all the time just as the good guys are.
right.
So what, briefly, obviously we won't go too in depth on this, but what do firm managers have to keep an eye out for now that AI can be used in that way as well?
Yeah, so we're all talking about how do we use AI better? Right, the bad guys are doing that too, and they have an
Mhm.
advantage over us because they're already tech savvy. They already have tools and resources that we don't have, and so their their progression of using AI is going to go faster than ours. But we're seeing that manifest in a lot more phishing attempts that are looking very authentic and hard to distinguish. So making sure that we do our due diligence, looking at emails, looking at addresses, trying to spot the fakes, right? But also with deep fakes out there on the internet, malicious actors are using AI to create fake content, fake things that don't even exist, or manipulate images or videos of things that do exist. And so there's a few resources we do have to combat that. If you go to aiornot.com, you can say, hey, is this image AI generated or not? And there's a whole bunch of algorithms that can kind of help spot the markers of whether an image or a video is fake or AI generated or not. We have some tools like that, but it's the wild, wild west. There's no like, hey, if you create an AI video, it has to have this watermark so everybody knows it's AI. That does not exist.
Oh,
Right. And so they're like MIT Media Labs has created a great little educational campaign around how to spot deep fakes and educate yourself. So there's some of those resources that we can take away.
yeah, certainly a lot of research to do. So uh, Um, so thanks so much, Eric, for being here and kind of, showing us the layers of the lasagna, to go back to the earlier metaphor, and how to put that all together. So I really appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. This is great. I love talking about this stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks to our viewers and listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, give us a like or comment, and you can catch us anywhere that you get your podcasts. And as always, you can learn more about ALA at alanet.org. Until next time.